This title slide kind of gives you an idea that I'm going to be talking about a portfolio of drought impact monitoring tools. First, I'll talk a little bit about the broader purpose and context of drought impacts, research, monitoring policy, and then I'll get into the nitty-gritty of the tools a little bit because it's all related. So why do we track drought impacts? From a research standpoint, we want to better understand the effects of drought on people, the economy, and the environment. And we are always looking for longitudinal impacts data. It's very hard to find going back over time. From a response and recovery standpoint, we want to know where to direct relief. Also, impacts are one of several inputs into the US Drought Monitor. And from a planning standpoint, this is typically on a longer time horizon, but impacts point to underlying vulnerability. So tracking impacts can help us figure out where to direct long-term efforts to reduce vulnerability so the next drought doesn't have such a dramatic effect. So just a broad overview of what is drought impact data. I think people have this idea that there's just a lot of data out there, and there is, but it's not about drought impacts. Sort of the holy grail of drought impact data would be quantified and expressed in a common unit, such as dollars. And really, there's only one place I know of where that systematically exists, and that is this USDA database that exists because there's a commodity crop and farmers buy insurance, and then they file insurance claims when drought or other natural hazards reduce their crop yield. So all of these things come together. There's incentive for producers to participate. There's a federal coordinating system, and there's kind of a commodity or dollar value. This contributes to really good data, but this is a unique instance. And people are always telling me, well, that's just anecdotal data. And it's like, well, yes, that is how it starts. A lot of times narrative or qualitative data emerges as a constituent call saying, something's wrong here, we have a problem, or in news media, which is designed to detect a deviation from normal, much like drought. A lot of times people pick up things on social media first or in citizen science observations. And in general, certainly there are scientific articles that do a great job of documenting the effects of drought on, for example, insect infestation on certain species of pine trees in the West and things like that. But those aren't comprehensive in terms of telling us all the places where that occurs. It's more about explaining the mechanism. So that would be too sparse to document drought impacts in the way that we need for policy. And then media reports actually also have some built-in credibility. It's not peer review, but there's a news judgment process, an editorial process that does bring some objectivity to it, but they tend to be pretty broad brush and don't have the kind of spatial granularity that we're looking for. So that's where we end up trying to supplement these kind of official, highly credible sources with things like citizen science and crowdsourcing, where we're really looking for more eyes on the ground or more boots on the ground in more places to help us find out exactly where things are happening. And ideally, the way that this works is as a problem is identified, such as, and on the right of my slide, dry wells in California, in the Central Valley, households were running out of wells in the drought in the 2010s, and they still struggle with this in some places. The state, first we heard reports about that in news media, then the state established this database, this tracking system, and reached out and worked with community water systems and nonprofits to begin connecting people to water. So things do first emerge often as a narrative, hey, there's something wrong here. Then for decision making, you need to gather systematic data. And that is very often, that needs to be a government undertaking. And then there's a policy response. So that's my, how we think about Drought 101. So then what the Drought Impacts Toolkit, this is a newish since 2018 website at the Drought Center brings, is a couple of curated collections. Basically, these are not tools that exist on our site. We've got places to look for emerging droughts and post-drought impact assessments. I will talk very briefly. The rest of my talk is going to be about monitoring emerging drought impacts. So we'll talk briefly about places to look for emerging drought, and then we'll plunge into the elevator speech on the different tools. So this page of emerging impacts or places to look, really, it's got a lot of stuff. I encourage you to go look if you're interested in this. For example, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers regularly puts out press releases saying during drought, saying things like river navigation is reduced due to lower river levels because of drought, or hydropower production is reduced due to drought. All of these things are drought impacts. And it doesn't really make sense to put them all into one tool, such as the Drought Impact Reporter, which was kind of our initial concept in building the Drought Impact Reporter. It turns out that it always matters why you're asking the question, what you're going to do about it. So what the Drought Impact Reporter does really well is record media-based drought impacts. And by that, I mean, at the heart of the Drought Impact Reporter is a Drought Center employee named Denise Gutzmer, who spends the better part of her working days going through an automated news search result list, looking for evidence of a drought impact. Our definition of a drought impact is evidence that it meets a loss, that there was a loss or change at a specific place and time due to drought. So what's in here is it's kind of the gold standard for drought impact information. But again, it's a broad scan, it's media-based. It's not quantitative data about one particular impact. We're also in the process of giving the Drought Impact Reporter kind of a new look. It's the same data, but I feel like this new Esri dashboard is going to display it much more effectively. We'll have a year-to-date DIR dashboard, and then there'll also be a set of maps that are searchable and downloadable that let you query past years for the Drought Impact Reporter. Coming out of the experience with the Drought Impact Reporter, I used to sometimes, at first I was frustrated, and then I was kind of inspired. I was frustrated that, you guys don't want to read the news, you just want to count the news. And I was like, well, wait a minute, people do count the news when they're trying to measure concern or awareness. So what we've developed for, we've got a layer, the points on this map are news stories that are the result of an automated search that are then filtered to in-state news in the state that it's about. So all the dots on Arizona are news about drought in Arizona that appeared in Arizona publications. And this is a week's worth of drought news across the country. And then the colors on the map are the media drought index, where we're comparing, the red is more than you'd expect and the blue is less than you would expect, based on about 10 years of data for a given state and month. So in other words, there's always more drought news in California than, for example, Wyoming. But then if you standardize it for that state, it tells a more interesting story. So right now I've chosen Arizona over here on the left. It's zoomed into Arizona and it's giving me the time series of Arizona interest in drought. The DSCI is at the bottom, the Drought Severity and Coverage Index, which is the US Drought Monitor in one statistic. And you can see that seems like the increase in drought kind of preceded the interest in drought in Arizona in this most recent case. So it's just kind of interesting to look at the attention rising and falling over time. We also track drought-related tweets. This is, again, a week's worth of, I'm sorry, what you're seeing now is a couple months worth of tweets, but the default view of the map is a week's worth of tweets. It's what you get varies highly from one location to another. Sometimes farmers in the Great Plains, farmers and ranchers will actually take pictures off the back of their tractors and say, look how dusty it is. And that is great information for drought monitor purposes. In other places like New Mexico comes to mind, it tends to be a more professional dominated conversation where it's media professionals, climate professionals, or extension, but not so much ag producers themselves. In other places, it's urban populations. And some places just flat out do not tweet about drought. So it's highly variable by the local culture. Cocorahs is a really great way to, it's a very credible citizen science organization. The important thing to know here is that in 2016, they added the option to file a condition monitoring report to the daily precipitation observations. The condition monitor report had 7-point dry to wet scale, where you just click, is it severely dry, moderately dry, all the way to severely wet? And people just really took to that, and it seemed to greatly increase participation. So Cocorahs is a great way not only to submit daily precipitation reports, but also to provide drought related information. We inherited the Visual Drought Atlas is based on an inherited archive of photos from Cocorahs and SCIP, the Southern Climate Impacts Program. They had a field days photo project to document landscape conditions over time in dry years and wet years at several points in the year. And I'll talk to you more about that later, but the main thing to know about the Visual Drought Atlas is that it's very landscape over time oriented. Then we have Condition Monitoring Observer Reports, or CMOR, that help us see more drought. These are, I think of them as a sibling to Cocorahs. They are based on, they've got the same 7-point dry to wet scale. One difference is that they have a checklist of impacts that you can check off, of drought impacts. And they also allow you to upload up to 5 photos. So next steps are to fill gaps in how we collect drought impacts. How do we hear from people or places that are not yet represented? To explore methods for cross-validating reports from different sources. And on the technical side, that might look like combining layers and mixing and matching things a little more than we can do quite yet. So that's what I have at this point. Thank you.